I've been living in the US for quite some time now, but I grew up somewhere else. I grew up in Southern Europe. Living between cultures can be a strange feeling, and nothing is necessarily wrong with it. But things can be slightly different. Like in one place, you're too direct, but then in another, you're too sensitive. You're speaking the same language, but really, you're still translating everything in your head. Hi, I'm Dina, and this is Dina's Journal Podcast. Welcome back to episode 6. And this is a weekly podcast where we talk about anything and everything. Thank you for joining me. And I've been thinking a lot about how this actually feels, and I wanted to talk about that. Not necessarily what's better or worse, but just to tell you how it feels like to exist in the in-between. So let's get into it. Let's talk about communication, because one of the things that I have seen and one of the biggest difference is the communication style. Back home, things tend to be more direct, right? If someone has an issue with you, they'll tell it to your face. They'll say it. If they don't like something, they'll say it. Even if it's blunt, even if it's, they don't mean it in a way to hurt you, but even if it hurts, they'll say it to you. And that's just how things are. And honestly, there's something refreshing to that, right? That's clarity. You know where you stand with them. You know what you're getting into, and things don't stay under the surface for that long. But I would say there's less space for feelings, right? If someone hurt you, the response might be, don't take it too personally. That's just how it is. You're too sensitive. And sometimes you just learn to absorb things and you just learn to get on with it, move on, and that's it. But then when I came to the US, this was a big culture shock because I found out that communication felt gentler here. Right? There's more awareness around emotions and feelings and emotional impacts, more space for saying, that hurt me. And I think there's some beauty to that as well, because things don't get said directly to you. However, that can give you space to kind of understand what's going on in the background, right? But that also means that conflict can linger and issues get often softened or avoided. And this is where I realized something important. Direct cultures can prioritize clarity, but then gentler cultures can prioritize emotional safety. And I don't think one or the other is the right answer. Neither is perfect. Both have strengths and both have blind spots. But the beauty of it is, and when you figure this out, is when you live in between those two things. You're constantly adjusting, right? And these differences don't just change conversations, right? They change how you see yourself. Because if you're normal, in quotes, in one place, and then maybe you're too much at another place, who are you really, right? And that question hits deeper than we think, than we want to admit. So as someone who comes from different cultures, right, I speak besides English, I speak 2 other languages, which are my native languages. And speaking those 2 other languages is not just about vocabulary, right? It's about tone, nuance, emotional weight. And sometimes I'll say something in English, right, when I'm having a conversation or even when I'm writing or reading, I immediately think, wait, did that sound the way I meant it to sound? Because we're constantly translating in our heads, right? And then when I do that and I translate and I realize that it might not carry the same feeling in another language, in this case, English. And this shows in my work too, right? I in school, I have to read a lot of papers and I have to do a lot of writing. And this is scientific writing. So everything that I do will take much longer, right? Because I have to reread things. I have to, make sure that however I'm interpreting it is the right way, or is the way that it's meant to be interpreted. And that can leave a lot of space for error, or a lot of space that, that I might not anticipate. So I do take that extra time, and I do take those moments where I need to figure it out. There's an invisible cognitive load, and when you're constantly translating, right? And that's something many international people deal with quietly, right? We don't always say it, we don't always think about it, but this is what happens in the background. And it's not about, how intelligent you are. It's really about mental energy. I think, like, even if you're, even if you have a simple day where you just, you went to the store and you talked to people, or you had a conversation with a friend, that can be mentally exhausting. Seriously, even if you didn't do anything special, but that in itself, because you have that load, because you have that cognitive load, and you have to translate everything. And if you've ever moved countries, you probably experienced this, and you felt that mentally you're actually tired even when nothing really happened. And this might be why, right? This is really could be one of the reasons that that's happening, because your brain is adapting all the time. We're always adapting in a new environment, new language, new people, new culture. Let's shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about food, because I love food. And this was another big shift for me. I'm sure you've been to like a Mediterranean restaurant or a Greek restaurant, and you've tasted something different. And I've been to those too. But let me tell you, it's not as authentic as it would be if you do go to the Mediterranean. And that was a big shift, because back home, food feels simpler. You have more local produce, less sugar hidden in food, smaller portions. Meals usually are slower, and they're usually a social event, right? We don't just eat quick to like get it done with. We actually sit down. It's a family or social event. And there's a beauty to that. There's like something about that slowness, about that eating meals that are in them, right? You know the ingredients, you know who produced it. You might even know the farmer, especially if you come from a small town like I am. But here in the US, I immediately noticed when I first came that there was bigger portions, right? The portions are huge. There's sugar in places where you wouldn't think there would be sugar, right? And the thing about food here is that it's convenient, right? Every block of your street has a fast food restaurant or some sort of convenience store or something that you can easily get to. And it made me realize something important. Habits aren't just discipline, they are the environment, right? If you are surrounded by healthier choices, then that's easier for you to follow that habit or to follow that routine. If it doesn't necessarily mean that that's wrong. It just means that you need more awareness, or that's what I realized. I needed to be aware of what I was putting into my body when it came to food, right? So I didn't start blaming myself. Instead, I started adapting, right? So how can I bring a piece of home here? Something that will make me even feel like home, but also make those healthier choices. And that meant cooking more. That meant reading labels. I know that can be a little too much. And then being mindful of portions, right? Like going back to those roots, going back to those this is what and like looking at it scientifically, right? Like looking at it, what makes sense for my body, for my weight, for my height, for my health, right? And like, how do I adapt to that? because it's not about judgment. It's about understanding your surroundings, understanding your environment. And then I started also thinking about the pace, right? And I love thinking about this because I see some of the differences and similarities here as well. The pace of life is different too, right? Here it feels like it's very fast, like you're always on the go. You're always, you're ambitious, you're structured, you're productive, you're reaching your goals, you're fighting for the next best thing. And honestly, that's growth. That pushed me to grow. That pushed me to, like progress in school and work and do all these great things that I have been able to do here. It built discipline. It created momentum. All those things that you need to keep going in life, right? It created my routine. It created, everything that like I think of it as being successful. And when I thought about back home, I thought, okay, like it feels like life is slower there. It feels like, your coffee lasts longer, your coffee breaks with your friends, or people linger. They love to chat. They love to stick around and have a conversation. Time feels less optimized, and that builds presence in your community, in your family, in your group. And I realized that the fast pace can build momentum, but the slow pace can build presence. And there's a beauty in both those things because I think we need both. I realize that we need both. I think there are times where you do need to move fast and you do need to keep going and reach your goals and be structured. But there are times that you need to slow down, because when you slow down, you build that presence and you build that relationship with yourself, and you understand who you are and where you are. But in all of this, here is the part that I feel like people don't talk enough about. Living between cultures and between two very different cultures can make you feel like you belong nowhere and everywhere at the same time. And because you go home and people say you've changed. You either look very different, you seem very different, you talk very different. Because let me tell you, your accent changes in your own language, and it's scary. And sometimes you even forget words, and that's scary. And then people mock you for it. I get it, but you need to understand, I'm also translating again in my head. But then you are abroad, in this example, the US, and you feel slightly different. Like you maybe don't belong in some places. And first that can be destabilizing. Like you don't fully fit anywhere. But that was how I saw it at first, but now I see it differently. It's not that I don't belong. It's that I belong to more than one version of reality. I think of it as I can be two people at the same time, because that's a very powerful meaning, and it does something powerful to you, right? When you rebuild yourself in a new culture, you learn something very important. You can handle change. You've already adjusted your tone, your habits, your social cues, your thinking. Life becomes less scary because you've already done something hard, right? You've already adapted. You've already changed. You're already speaking a whole new language, and you're learning how to fit in. And that in itself is very powerful. At least I think so. Because when you live, and I'm not saying this is wrong or anything, but when you live in one culture your whole life, then you assume that your way is the way. But living in different cultures actually shows you that there are multiple right ways to live and to do things in life. You start thinking about how different ways on how to handle conflict, different ways to express love, different ways to define success. You realize that culture shapes behavior more than character does, right? And that makes us less rigid, slower to judge, but also makes us more open, right? We're open to new ideas, new mentality, new ways of thinking, and you start realizing that there's this whole new world that you kind of unlocked, right? Because when you're constantly adjusting tone or adjusting how you think, you become aware. You learn when to be soft, when to soften, when to be direct, when to push, when to pause and think and reflect. Because that's not you being confused, it's actually versatility. You learn how to be versatile, right? And yes, like there are moments where I mispronounce things, or, I misunderstand some references, or I'll say things that I think they're funny, but they don't turn out to be funny. So that can be awkward, right? And yes, you do feel slightly out of place. And I've had many of those moments. But you slowly start realizing if you get embarrassed, it's not the end of the world. If you get in an awkward conversation or situation, that won't kill you, because discomfort can actually be very valuable. That can build resilience, and we love resilience. We love having that power, having that control, that we can adapt and we can change anywhere you can put us in. For people that have moved around, for people that have experienced different cultures, they understand that anywhere they'll go, they are able to be resilient, they are able to adapt, they are able to learn new things, exciting things, difficult things, and they know how to adapt. And that is a powerful tool to have, I think. And for a long time, I struggled with that identity, right? What should I choose? Like, should I, I'm proud to be where I'm from, right? But there was always that, am I more European or am I fitting more into this culture here in the US? Like, and there's a difficult choice, or at least I thought so. But now I see it differently. I'm not half of each. I'm something new. When you live between cultures, you actually start realizing that you're designing your own blend, right? You take the warmth from one culture and then the structure from another. And then you take the discipline from one culture and then the emotional awareness from another. And what I really start realizing is actually I'm building my own system. And that's a real gift. I'm not choosing one or the other, even though I'm proud of where I'm from, even though I'm proud of how good I can fit into a new environment. But that doesn't mean I have to be one or the other. That just means that I have created this great system for myself, and that's a real gift. That's the little cherry on top from this experience, I think. And living between those two cultures or different cultures isn't about deciding which one is better or which one would be better. It's about learning from both. It's about taking what you need from both, keeping what aligns, letting go of what doesn't. Not everything is going to work out, so you have to let it go. You have to move on. And building something in between. I think the in between is the sweet spot. I think the in between is something where everyone should strive for. And if you ever felt like, you're translating yourself or you're in your head trying to figure out how to say something in another language, I see you. I am just like that. You're not confused. I see you. You're just expanding. You're just becoming your own self, and you're building your own system. And yes, in the beginning, that can feel a little uncomfortable, but actually, that's a powerful place to be in. And with that, thank you for joining me in another episode of Dina's Journal podcast. This was episode 6. Thank you for joining me yet again. And if you've moved around a lot and you're in a different place and you're learning new cultures, new languages, tasting new foods, I want to know more about you. Put it down below in the comments, what you think about this episode, but also where you're coming from. I want to know where my audience is from. I think that will be a really cool chat. And also subscribe and follow and give it a like if you want. That helps a lot, and I really, really appreciate it. You can also follow me on all other social platforms at Dina's_journal. And I'd love to see you there, and I'd love to keep creating with you. So thank you for hanging out with me. Cheers. Bye.